They tried to fine me $15,000 for taking care of something that wasn't even mine to begin with, and the worst part is on paper, they were absolutely right. When I opened that letter, I laughed the kind of laugh that comes out when your brain refuses to believe what your eyes are seeing. By the time I got to the bottom of the page, coffee still warm in my hand, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the kind of insanity only bureaucracy can produce. It was one of those early spring mornings in Holbrook Ridge where winter still lingers in the shadows, but the air carries that damp, earthy smell that says the thaw is coming. I was in my kitchen, half awake, sorting through the usual stack of bills, hardware store flyers, junk mail addressed to people who hadn't lived there in 10 years, when I saw the envelope with the blue state seal stamped across the front. I figured taxes, maybe some county update, something dull and forgettable. Instead, it was a formal notice from the Department of Environmental Resources informing me that I was in violation of state law for illegally controlling a regulated water structure on my property. Their wording, not mine. A dam, they called it. Because I had failed to obtain the proper permits, engineering approvals, and operator certification, I was being assessed a civil penalty of $15,000. I read it twice, then a third time, then set it on the counter and stared at it like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something human. They didn't. Now here's the part that makes the whole thing so ridiculous. I didn't build that dam. It had been sitting there long before I ever bought the place. 8 years earlier, I'd bought a few quiet acres just outside Holbrook Ridge, a modest cabin tucked near the foothills woods on one side, a creek running along the back edge of the land. The cabin was fine, the price was decent, but the real reason I bought it was the pond. It sat right where the creek narrowed, held in place by an old earthen dam. Not some giant concrete monster, nothing dramatic, just packed soil and stone reinforced years ago by somebody who probably knew what they were doing better than I ever would. It had a simple spillway enough to keep the water moving without tearing the whole thing apart. And it was beautiful in that quiet, private way things are when nobody's trying too hard. In the mornings, the surface would go still as glass, reflecting the trees, the sky, the low fog hanging over the water. Deer came down there to drink. Herons stood near the edge like old men thinking deep thoughts. Even people driving past would slow down a little just to look. That pond gave the whole property a kind of peace you can't fake. So yeah, I took care of it. Not because anybody hired me to. Not because I thought I owned the structure in some legal sense, but because it was there, because it mattered, because leaving it alone felt like neglect. Every spring after the runoff started, I'd head down there with gloves, a shovel, maybe a rake, and clear branches out of the spillway. If the soil was washing loose, I'd patch it. If the edge looked weak, I'd tamp it back down. Nothing fancy, nothing engineered, just basic upkeep, the kind any decent landowner would do to keep something from falling apart. I never thought of it as operating a regulated water structure. I thought of it as preventing a mess. A few weeks before that letter arrived, 2 state employees had come out to inspect the property. One was a woman in her 40s, maybe, sharp eyes, neat posture, clipboard tucked under one arm like it was an extension of her body. The other was younger, quieter, mostly taking pictures and measurements. They introduced themselves politely enough. Routine review of small water control structures in the county, the woman said. The pond, I asked. The dam, she corrected without even blinking. That should have told me everything. They walked the site for about an hour, taking notes, asking when it had been built, whether I had permit records, construction documents, engineering certifications. I told them the truth. It was there when I bought the land. I had no records. I hadn't built anything. I just maintained it so it wouldn't erode. The younger guy gave me a look that said he understood exactly what I meant. The woman wrote something down and said, "We'll follow up." And boy, did they. After I got the letter, I called the number on it, pacing my living room, trying to keep my voice level. I explained the whole situation again, that the structure predated me, that I wasn't using it for irrigation or power or profit, that I'd only been keeping it from washing out. There was a pause. Then I heard her voice. Same woman. Calm, even almost gentle in that bureaucratic way that somehow makes everything worse. "Sir," she said, "if you are not the registered operator of that dam, then you are not authorized to perform maintenance on it." I stopped walking. "I'm sorry, what?" "Any activity that alters, preserves, or maintains the function of a regulated water structure can be considered operational control." I rubbed my forehead and looked out the window toward the tree line. "So the reason I'm being fined," I said slowly, "is because I've been trying to keep it from collapsing." "Yes." No sarcasm, no hesitation, just yes. That one word landed harder than the fine. I asked the next question carefully because by then something had started turning over in my mind. "What happens if I stop?" Another pause. Then in that same flat official tone, she said, "You are not required to maintain a structure you are not authorized to operate." And there it was. Not just the answer, the omission. She didn't say the dam had to be saved. She didn't say failure would bring another penalty. She didn't warn me about environmental consequences, downstream issues, or public safety. She just gave me the rule clean and bloodless and left the rest sitting there between us. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the quiet, listening to the creek out back. That was the twist right there, the moment I realized I didn't need to fight them. Didn't need to hire some engineer I couldn't afford, didn't need to beg the state for permission to preserve a pond I never asked to regulate. All I had to do was nothing, so I did. Spring rolled in hard that year. Snowmelt came down from the hills, the creek swelled branches and silt and half-rotted debris started coming through like always. Normally I'd be down there before breakfast, boots, muddy coffee, cooling in a thermos, clearing the spillway before it backed up. That year I sat on the porch. I won't lie, it felt wrong at first, almost immoral. There's something in you, some old human wiring that kicks in when you see a thing starting to fail. You want to fix it. You want to put your hands on it, shore it up, keep the world from breaking one small piece at a time. But every time I thought about heading down there, I heard her voice again. "You are not authorized." So I stayed put. A couple weeks later, my neighbor Carl wandered over. Carl was one of those men who looked like he'd been carved out of old leather and engine grease, retired mechanic half a mile down the road, always squinting like the sun had personally offended him. He leaned on the fence and looked toward the pond. "You haven't been down there," he said. Not a question. I shrugged. "Taking a break," Carl grunted. "Water's running high. Saw a lot of junk coming through last night." "Yeah," I said, I noticed. He waited, probably expecting me to say I'd deal with it. When I didn't, he gave me a long look, then pushed off the fence. "Well," he muttered, "your land." But the way he said it, there was concern in it. Confusion, too. Because out here, everybody knows the same thing. If you stop taking care of something, nature will take over, and nature is not sentimental. By early summer, the first changes showed up. Nothing dramatic, not yet. The spillway started clogging with branches and leaves. Water pushed sideways instead of cleanly through. Small channels formed along the face of the dam where the runoff had started cutting its own path through the soil. One afternoon, I walked down there just to look. The ground under my boots felt softer than it should have. I crouched near one of the little rivulets and ran a finger through the wet dirt. It wouldn't take much, I realized. One good stretch of weather, one hard storm, maybe two, and the whole thing would start giving way. My body almost moved on its own. I could picture the shovel, the quick patch job, the tamping the way I'd done it a dozen times before. Instead, I stood up, brushed off my hands, and walked away. By July, the pond had started shrinking. Mud appeared at the edges. The clean shoreline turned ragged. The herons stopped showing up. Deer still came through sometimes, but less often. Even the sound changed. What used to be a soft hush became something more uneven, more strained, like the water itself was trying to decide whether to stay or leave. Carl came back one evening with a six-pack and that look on his face that said he already knew more than he was asking. We sat on the porch, watching the light go orange through the trees. "She's not holding like she used to," he said. "No," I said. "You gonna fix it?" I took a sip and finally told him everything: the inspection, the letter, the fine, the phone call, the part where I was apparently criminally guilty of basic common sense. Carl listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out this short, dry laugh. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You keep it from breaking, they fine you. You let it break, and that's fine." "Seems that way." He shook his head. "Hell of a system." Then he said something that stayed with me. "Sometimes the only winning move," he muttered, staring out at the dark tree line, "is not to play." By late summer, the dam looked exhausted. The edges had slumped. The spillway had widened by force, not design. Every rainstorm pushed a little harder, carved a little deeper, took a little more. I started checking the forecast, the way people check hospital monitors, not because I could do anything, but because I knew eventually the numbers would tell me when the end was coming. It came in the fall. One of those storms settled over the hills and just sat there hour after hour, dropping more water than the ground could hold. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound that didn't belong in the dark. Not thunder, not wind, something heavier. A low collapse, then a deep rushing roar like the creek had suddenly found a bigger throat. I sat up in bed and listened. There was a brief silence, then the full force of it hit water, moving fast, hard, final. I knew without looking. The dam was gone. I didn't run outside. That's the part people always judge. But there was nothing to save by then, and besides, I already understood what I'd find. I sat there on the edge of the bed, listening to the creek rewrite the land, and after a while I lay back down and let the sound roll through the dark like a verdict. In the morning, I walked down with my coffee. The pond was gone. Not partly drained, not damaged, gone. Where that still sheet of water had lived for years, there was now wet grass, exposed stone, and a fresh-cut channel of water moving straight through the middle. The creek had reclaimed itself in a single night like it had only been waiting for permission. What remained of the dam barely looked man-made anymore. Just a collapsed rise of dirt and rock blending back into the earth. And I felt two things at once. First, I missed it. I missed the stillness, the deer, the herons, the mornings when the pond held the whole sky like a secret. I really did. But underneath that grief was something lighter, almost embarrassing in its relief. I was free. No more patching, no more inspections, no more imaginary authority over a structure I never asked to control. Just a creek being a creek. A few days later, Carl came over, walked straight to the back without knocking, and stood beside me looking at the new channel. Well, he said after a while, that answers that. Yeah. He nudged a rock into the water with his boot and watched it disappear. Funny thing, he said, looks like it belongs more now than it did before. 3 weeks later, the state came back. Same truck, same younger guy with the camera, same woman with the clipboard, neat as a pin face, unreadable as ever. They walked the site again, but this time there wasn't much for them to inspect. No spillway, no controlled pond, no maintained barrier, just a natural waterway cutting through open ground. Finally, the woman turned to me. Has there been any recent construction or removal activity on this site? No, ma'am, I said. That wasn't a lie. She studied me for a second, then looked back at her notes. Based on current conditions, she said this appears to be a naturally restored waterway. There is no longer a regulated structure present on the property. I let that settle before I asked. So what does that mean for the violation? She flipped a page. With no regulated structure in place, there is no basis for enforcement. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, no sorry, we nearly charged you 15 grand for preserving a piece of history nobody else cared enough to claim. Just a clean administrative ending like she was closing out a file and heading to lunch. They drove off and I never heard another word about the fine, and that more than anything taught me something ugly and useful. At the same time, sometimes the people enforcing the rules don't care what survives, only whether the paperwork lines up. Sometimes doing the responsible thing gets punished and doing nothing at all gets rewarded. Sometimes the law protects process so fiercely that it forgets the thing it was supposedly built to protect. I still walk down to that creek now and then. It sounds different, faster, less polished, but also more honest somehow. Like it's no longer being forced to hold a shape someone else chose for it. Do I regret letting the dam fail? Some days, yes. Some days I think about that pond and everything alive around it, and I wonder whether I should have fought harder. Hired somebody, spent money I didn't have. Gone to war with a system that mistakes care for control. Other days I remember that letter, that voice on the phone, that perfect little bureaucratic trap. And I think maybe the real lesson is this: when power gets too detached from common sense, it eventually destroys the very thing it claims to regulate. In the end, the state got its answer, the creek got its freedom, the fine disappeared, and the only thing that drowned was the illusion that fairness and legality are always the same thing. So tell me this: if you were in my place, would you have followed the rules and let it collapse? Or would you have broken them to save something beautiful? And more importantly, where do you think the line is between justice and revenge, between responsibility and surrender? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever dealt with a rule, a fine, or an authority figure that punished the right thing and rewarded the wrong one, I want to hear that story too.